Dudes and dudettes, how are you guys? This is Chazzy and welcome back to Chazzy's Top 10, the segment on this channel where I do a random top 10 list of random topics randomly in a completely random order that I randomly select and whatnot. Actually, in case this is the first time you've ever been to my channel and your first time watching a Chazzy's Top 10, this is not a traditional top 10 countdown. I actually do it in reverse, you know, so I start off at number 1 and work my way down all the way to number 10. It's just easier for me that way and I prefer it. So now this is going to be my first horror related video in a while because I'm going to be counting down what I personally consider to be the top 10 scariest urban legends, specifically in the United States, you know. So I'm going to be excluding Japanese urban legends, Mexican urban legends, European urban legends, although there are like one or two, you know, that might have influences from Europe, you know, but they are still largely based in America. And this is a personal list, you know. It's not like, you know, it's not like I'm taking a bunch of different lists and putting them together. No, this is what I consider to be the top 10 scariest ones, right? So let's just get into it so I can already cause you a sleepless night, huh? So the very first one is a classic and one of my personal favorites, The Babysitter and the Man Upstairs. This one dates back all the way to the 1960s and is about a teenage girl who is alone babysitting 2 kids at night, you know. There's nobody else in the house, but she starts receiving phone calls, you know, from this man who keeps telling her to go check the children over and over again. Then she finally does and he calls her again and asks her how the children were, you know, and the calls start to get more and more threatening until she finally calls the police, who trace the call, you know. She manages to keep the guy on the line for a few minutes and they trace the call, and that's when she finds out that the calls are coming from inside the house, you know. Now this is where the legend has a few different variations, you know. Sometimes the babysitter will be murdered when the police get there along with the kids, or just the kids will be murdered, the babysitter will find their bodies, or the police will find just the babysitter murdered and the kids are hiding somewhere, or they actually all manage to escape, you know, with the killer after them. This is actually very unnerving for a number of reasons. Just trying to imagine yourself, you know, alone in a house, you know, completely by yourself with no adults or guardians or neighbors around, just 2 kids fast asleep, and somebody starts calling you, making it very clear that they're watching you from somewhere, you know, and they clearly have malicious intent. And I actually really enjoy this one because it's so grounded and realistic, you know. There's nothing supernatural, you know. That's why I think it's really just frightening to that aspect. It's very personal. It was made into a series of different films, notably When a Stranger Calls in 1976, and later there was a remake in 2006 of the same name, you know, starring Camilla Bell. What really unnerves me is that this was actually based on a real-life murder case that happened in 1950 when a teenage babysitter named Janet Craftsman was actually murdered, you know. So there is basis in reality to some degree, man, and that's why this is the first entry on this list. Now, if you happen to be afraid of spiders, if you suffer from arachnophobia, or just don't like insects in general, I strongly suggest you skip this next one because it is the legend of the spider bite. This one emerged in England in the 1970s, but it gained a lot of traction in North America for being so gritty and just downright disgusting, you know. And it does concern an American tourist, you know. Usually the legend starts out with an American woman, you know, from somewhere in the north of the country, like New York City, for example, taking a vacation somewhere in the south, like Mexico, you know, a tropical country in South America or near South America, because Mexico isn't South America, right? It's actually part of Central America, I believe. But still, the point is that she goes there on vacation, she's just sunbathing, minding her own business, then a spider crawls over her cheek, you know, stays there for a moment and leaves. And at first, you know, nothing really happens, but she then starts to notice that there's something wrong. She looks in the mirror and sees a little red mark, you know, the spider actually bit her, and it starts to swell, you know, and get worse and worse and start itching. She goes to the doctor, who pokes at it, you know, tries to figure out what's going on, and that's when it bursts and out comes hundreds of tiny baby spiders crawling all over her face. And usually she goes insane from the shock. There is a different variation where it's a little girl, you know, and her mom sees the bite and tells her to just leave it alone, but it starts to get worse and worse over the next few days. The girl goes to take a bath and that's when the spiders come out, you know. It's crazy, it's insane, but usually the victim is left traumatized, you know? It's really hard to imagine this happening, and I mean, it really picks at the fear, you know, that people have of bugs crawling on their faces, you know, and that kind of thing. It's just really, really insane, man, you know? And this story is actually, it seems to be pretty realistic, you know, because it all, if you go to certain South American countries that aren't as clean as certain places in the north of the world, you know, with a lot of dangerous insects and that kind of thing, you know, it's really, really possible. Although I don't think there's actually a real story behind this one. It just happened one day, but it is very, very disturbing in my opinion. But the next one is a little bit more supernatural, but is still a little unsettling too, because it is the vanishing hitchhiker. This urban legend can be traced back as far as the 1870s. You know, it has a very, very deep roots, you know, in history. And basically it's about a person who one day picks up a random passenger on the highway who's looking for a ride completely alone. Usually it's a young woman, and she requests to be taken to a specific location. So the driver takes her there, but when they arrive, she vanishes. He looks back and she's just completely disappeared, like she wasn't even there, you know? Now, usually he gets out of the car and asks, you know, on the location, like, I don't know, maybe it's a bar or an inn or a hotel or something, you know, or even someone's house. And then he inquires about it, and then the person who at the residence says that the person who the driver is describing has been deceased, you know? So essentially we are led to believe that it is the ghost of the person asking for a ride somewhere. This is actually a very interesting urban legend because there are a few different variations, you know? Sometimes, for example, the person will leave behind something like an address or something that will prompt the driver to go there and discover this information here. Maybe they'll actually go somewhere, like for example a public place like a restaurant, and they'll see a photo of the person somewhere on the wall, and they'll ask about it, and then they'll be told that the person died some years ago, you know? Or sometimes the driver will offer something like a sweater, you know, some kind of garment for the person because they're cold, and then eventually they will arrive at a cemetery, which is what the person requested to be left at, and then they will go to that person's gravestone and see their sweater there. It's really creepy, man, you know? But it's one of the most enduring legends because there have been there isn't actually, I believe that there isn't really an actual case of this happening. Mythbusters have debunked it and all that, but it's still really creepy, man. It's still very, very creepy to imagine this ever happening, you know? And it's been, you know, essentially parodied so many times over the years, but the original legend is still something that, if you really stop to think about it, can be a little bit of nightmare fuel. This next one might just be the most grounded and realistic urban legend on this list, to the point where it's less of a legend and more of an actual reality, you know? And the name already says it all: organ theft. This involves the forced removal of somebody's organs, usually their kidneys, you know, for transplant or to be sold on the black market. You know, usually the legend covers a person traveling somewhere like Eastern Europe or India or other parts of Asia, very, you know, impoverished areas with a lot of crime rates. And now a series of events lead to this person being drugged and later waking up in a bathtub with a scar where their kidney used to be. And they usually make the assumption that they lost that kidney, or the kidney is propped up on a chair in front of them, or the trafficker comes in and tells them what they did, you know? The person breaks down hysterically crying, but at that point there's nothing that they can do, you know? Sometimes they might wake up completely by themselves and make the assumption that something is wrong, because like a human body can survive with just one kidney. We do have two, but we can adapt to having one, so that's why traffickers usually go for that one, you know? And a healthy human kidney on the black market sells for as high as $126,000, so that's why people usually go for the kidneys. If you take out another organ, the person might die, so it becomes even more of a crime, you know? And it's crazy because in reality this does happen, you know? Like traffickers might coerce poor people to come into a place and take their kidneys so they can sell them, you know? Sometimes it's a war crime, or maybe the theft occurs in a hospital, you know? It's really crazy, man. And the fact that it can and probably does happen in real life makes it even scarier, but not as scary as the next one, which has a more of a basis in the supernatural, which is the legend of Screaming Jenny. The origin of this urban legend actually comes from West Virginia, and it's actually very, 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 scary, at least in my opinion, because it covers a girl named Jenny who a long time ago was living by herself, in rural Virginia. She didn't have any family and she had fallen on hard times, she struggled to get by, but she still managed to help other people, she would give her food to others who needed it more. Sometimes she would go without eating herself, and in those very cold autumn nights, she would warm herself by a fire, drinking soup or a warm other broth. But one day a spark flew from this fire and caught onto her skirt, and she didn't even notice because she was so hungry and eating, but the fire started to scorch her skin and slowly started to envelop her whole body, She started to run around screaming, and she made her way to the nearby train station looking for aid. But the more she ran, the more the fire consumed her, and it started to burn. She would feel so much unbearable pain, and she started to get closer to the station, letting out her blood-curdling screams. Unfortunately, a train that was on the tracks, didn't stop in time, and it actually hit and killed her, That's a very bad way to go, man. You're already on fire and then you get hit by a train, it's crazy. So the people saw her, they doused her, they gave her a proper burial in the area. But unfortunately, at some point later in the future, train conductors started to actually see this like ball of fire, running around the tracks. They would stop to help her, but when they got out, she was gone, Usually it happens on the anniversary of her death, she would the ghost of Jenny on fire would still be seeking help, for her condition. And sometimes you can actually hear her screaming in the night if you're in the right area at the right time. It's very, very creepy in my opinion, and also very sad. It's a very tragic tale, and just I shiver thinking about it, man. Poor Jenny. Like such a terrible grisly fate, So on the anniversary of her death, if you're ever in rural Virginia, just be careful because she might seek your help to put her out, and maybe you'll catch fire yourself. Now, the next entry really, really creeped me out some time ago, back when I still had a fear of driving, and it still resonates hard, especially if you have the habit of driving by yourself alone at night on a very desolate road. The Backseat Killer. This one here actually has origins, in the late 1960s, and it involves a woman driving by herself at night, and there's a car that starts following her for some reason, it tailgates her wherever she goes, starts shining its head beams, and even rams her car a few times, and she doesn't know what's going on, but she's obviously scared, so she drives faster. She finally gets home, and that's when the person in that car comes out and says that there is actually somebody in the back seat of her car holding a knife, Usually it's a deranged serial killer or an escaped mental patient, and whenever the person was shining their headlights, they were actually scaring the killer who had gotten up with the knife about to kill the woman, So, it's actually a cautionary tale. There is a moral to it because some variations include the woman at a gas station, and then she goes back to her car after she puts gas in it because the attendant or the clerk, says that there's a problem with her credit card, so then she comes back in, and that's when the person says, yeah, so there's a man in the backseat of your car, So there are quite a few different ways that this urban legend can go, but usually the person who's on the other side of it, whether it's in the car or the tenant, usually it's like a trucker, a lumberjack, a person who doesn't really look very savory that she can't trust, which is actually the person who's trying to save her life. I think it's really creepy, man, especially back when I was still scared of driving, when I was still going to get my driver's license last year. It really resonates deep, man. This one is one of my personal favorites, but holy crap is it scary. I really think it's pretty disturbing, although you could make an argumentative point that the next one is even more disturbing because it is about the hook. This one here is thought to have began circulating in the mid-1950s, and it's about a couple who are going on a romantic date somewhere far out of town, usually in like a little forest area or mountain zone, basically a place where they have a good view of the city. And then they hear on the radio a broadcast about a serial killer or a mental patient who escaped from a hospital, and they have a hook for a hand. So then they start to get a little bit creeped out, and for varying reasons they decide to leave and go back home. And this is where the legend actually comes into play, because sometimes, for example, they will leave the car and see that there is a hook embedded in the door handle, or they might have heard scraping sounds before, and they see scratches on the car. Maybe they'll see the hook hanging from somewhere else, to suggest that the killer was actually there watching them. Sometimes the girlfriend or the boyfriend is murdered. Maybe the boy will leave the car, because the girlfriend hears something. Then he'll investigate and come back to see her murdered. Or sometimes, the girl might actually run into the killer, and we see the boyfriend sever head in his hand or something. Or there was this other version where she actually hears scraping sounds, on top of the car roof. Then she goes back and sees that it's actually her dead boyfriend hanging from a tree with his hands scraping. It's really crazy the different directions that this one can go. It does serve as largely a cautionary tale, but there's always usually a serial killer involved. He's actually after them, or maybe they're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I still think it's crazy getting home and seeing that hook embedded somewhere in the car, suggesting that you were almost victim to him. It's crazy. It's not the scariest, but it is still a little, it's frightening, especially, taking the idea of rural America back in the day, where it was easier for serial killers to not get caught, so it still hits pretty close to home. Although the next one, well, hits even closer, I would say. This next one here really taps into the primal fear that we humans have of, going under bridges late at night, because in this particular one, we are dealing with the Bunny Man. This legend originated. Interesting. In Fairfax County, Virginia, way back in 1970, but it has also spread to other areas like Washington, D.C. or Maryland. Basically, it involves a person wearing a bunny costume who has an axe and supposedly tries to or actually kills people with it, Now, there haven't really been actual documented cases of murder victims as far as I know. I tried to research it, because it is just an urban legend, but it usually involves him mutilating the victims with the axe, and sometimes he will skin rabbits and leave them hanging, over the bridge, which is now called the Bunny Man Bridge, which is actually the Colchester overpass, in the same area of near Clifton, Virginia. So it's called the Bunny Man Bridge, and the photo is really creepy. It's just like a dark tunnel, It's really, really just complicated to imagine somebody ever having to go through that there, But overpass is a more fancy name for a bridge, So sometimes he will completely leave the rabbits there or mutilate the victims completely. Variations include, the weapons that he uses, the motives or lack thereof. Sometimes he'll even die. And it's said that on every Halloween, his ghost comes back, to haunt the area, and scare people. This one here is actually, it's complicated, man. It's complicated because anything can happen in a place like rural Virginia, because it's also where the Screaming Jenny legend comes from. So I think it's really complicated. There is a photo of the supposed axe that he actually used, although it looks strangely plastic. I don't know, maybe that's just what I see. I personally think that the Bunny Man legend is pretty crazy. Just to imagine walking down the street at night, going to a bridge, then you freaking see a guy wearing a rabbit costume and having an axe, man. I don't know. Maybe if somebody who's a little tougher might reflex kick or punch the guy, but I would probably run completely in the other direction. I wouldn't even care. And the next one is a little less it's more like folklore than actual urban legend, but it is still pretty creepy, because it is something that involves shape-shifting, for lack of a better term, the Arizona Skinwalkers. There's no actual dated origin to this urban legend, but it does come from Navajo culture, where basically a person, usually a witch, some kind of sorcerer, has the power to turn into different animals. Now, the animals in the story vary, but usually they are coyotes who are associated with, bad omens, in this part of the world. So the person usually, they might wear the skin of an animal and perform some kind of ritual that they can transform into one. The idea is usually to trick other people or to harm them. Sometimes they'll have an encounter with a skinwalker in the middle of the road. Then the person might turn into an animal to confuse them and turn back into a human and you know, attack or kill them. But usually there is harmful intent, you know. A lot is, not too much is known about what the intentions are of the skinwalkers, but it is still a very creepy place to imagine, you know, walking around, even if it's in the day. Because I mean, it's really hard for you to, you know, imagine a person becoming an animal out of nowhere. And usually, well, the animal is aggressive, you know, as far as I'm looking into my research here, you know. Now, they can be either male or female. There are stories of them being able to possess people too and walking around in their bodies. They can either shapeshift into animals or possess them, you know, so it's really complicated. This is I have a cheat sheet here, but this is the most complicated one to get through, you know. But basically, it just involves them turning into creatures, you know, that associates them with death and other bad omens. So yes, and it is considered to be evil in some instances of Nevada because of the witches and whatnot. So, really don't want to be part of any of that voodoo that they perform there. But still, if you're ever in Arizona and you see a coyote running around, be careful. It might just be human. And now last but certainly not least, although to me the least scary at the very least, I said least way too many times there, we have the infamous legend of Bloody Mary. Even though I don't think this legend originated in America specifically, it is still one of the most famous, you know, urban legends in history. So it's very universal. So I decided to include it here on this list, you know. But because there's no actual historical evidence to back up this actually happening, that's why I included it as number 10. It's not the scariest one to me, but it is still pretty unhinging because the origin dates back to the early 20th century about a woman named Mary who was looking into a mirror, and supposedly she would see a vision of the man that she would marry in the future. But if she were to die alone, she would just see a skull. And so the modern day legend is actually about people. You can do it by yourself or with friends. It's kind of like a ritual that you can perform where you would look into a mirror with a candle, you know, in some variations without one. You just look at the mirror and say the name Bloody Mary 3 times or sometimes more, but usually it's just 3. And apparently she will appear in the mirror, and this is where the story deviates in different paths. You know, she will either be friendly or malevolent, you know, and maybe she'll, you know, steal your soul, drink your blood, scratch your eyes out. You know, it really does depend. You know, sometimes you'll just see a vision of her, you know, maybe she'll talk to you. Different countries have different origins and different folklore, but in general, it's not good for you to summon her. You know, I've seen YouTubers try to do this ritual and it never works out. Nothing ever happens, but I'm obviously not going to try it myself, you know. I'm not exactly, like, I really don't want to risk anything, you know, even though I'm very skeptical when it comes to supernatural things, but I really don't want to try this one. But it has been parodied so many times in popular culture, movies and TV shows and books, you know, and I think it's one of the most enduring legends out there, you know, and that's why I put it on my list here, you know. And if you're ever curious about performing the ritual yourself, you're an idiot, you know, because you might lose a little bit more than just your dignity there, you know. It's complicated, you know. Maybe sometimes she'll curse the victim, she'll strangle them. I don't want to go through any of that. But anyway, guys, before I wrap this up, let me explain why I didn't include certain legends, you know, certain popular American legends like Aren't You Glad You Didn't Turn On the Light, that involves a roommate being killed, you know, and then the girl comes and sees her with blood on the wall, and also the licked hand where a murderer kills a dog. Those are a little bit too gruesome and I didn't want to cover them, and I also don't want to talk about dogs being murdered, so I wanted to leave those out, you know, intentionally. And that's essentially my list, you know. Those are what I personally consider to be the top 10 scariest urban legends, you know. This video came out a little different. It's been a while since I've done a top 10, and also I have to kind of rush here because my battery's running low, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. You know, it's gonna take a while to edit, and hopefully, you know, it will be worth the effort. So anyway, guys, let me know in the comments below if you agree with my list, if you disagree. Maybe in the future I'll do the top 10 scariest legends from Japan or other Asian countries, you know, and some parts of South America. That would be cool too. And that's it, guys. If you happen to enjoy this video, please go ahead and give it a like, and also subscribe to my channel because I release videos every single day. And while you're at it, hit the notification bell too so I can know exactly what time I upload. And it is all good. It's all good. Talking to my camera, the low battery there. And that's it, guys. This is Chazzy signing out for now. And as always, I will see you guys in the next video. Roll the outro screen.